Hey, welcome. As always, I'm excited about this course. I think, in particular, this topic today is actually really important, especially if you're someone who's interested in singing, a beginning singer in this process, or also a music teacher, especially teachers at schools where you have lots and lots of students. I think it's really important to kind of hear just some of the stories and things that and I think a lot of other teachers have picked up along the way. Anyways, we're gonna go over some tricks to help people go in the right direction as a beginning singer, and kind of what happens. And even for advanced singers, it's really important to kind of know what the fundamentals are and where people, what are the tendencies that most people have, because that's kind of our natural inclination. And it's actually there's a lot of really common things that happen. Certainly, hi, welcome, Chrissy. Good to see you again. Um, yeah, there's certainly a lot of things that are variations. Like, not everyone has the same exact issue, and that's also what's confusing sometimes, right? Is like you'll have a teacher saying like, "This is what you need to do," and that might be, "Hi, welcome, hi." They're saying this is what you need to do, and that might be advice that they learned and that helped their voice come into balance, and that's not always necessarily the right choice for certain singer, depending on what you're hearing and what they're describing in terms of what's uncomfortable or frustrating. So, again, like the main concept here is how do we get started, but it's also what gets people to stop. Why are people really frustrated with their voice and they say, "Oh, singing isn't for me," or "I'm not a singer," or even to the extent of people tell me I'm a terrible singer and I'll never try it ever again. Um, like I get a lot of students later in life who are all of a sudden interested in doing this again, and I'll go over some kind of typical stories in a second. But also like feel free to share your experiences. Like, what were some major roadblocks for you? If you're especially if you're an advanced singer, and what did you do to kind of help yourself through that? Because it's important to kind of to mention all these tools, but then you have to assess and figure out like, well, what is the thing that's causing my voice to be out of balance? Um, so let's kind of dive in. Um, I think in general, the biggest setbacks that people have has to do with pitch and tone. And the typical story that I tend to hear is, I, like everyone else, had music classes in school, and the teacher told me, "Don't sing or you're not a good singer," or a family member, said this kind of thing. And just to kind of describe what happened, sometimes it's because they, like, oh, there's a certain kind of tone that's sticking out, that's too bright or too dark, or you're not matching pitch very well. And it's frustrating because in a lot of these school situations, you don't get a lot of one-on-one. Yes, and we're going to talk about all of this in a second too. Yes, there's like you don't get a lot of one-on-one work when you're learning your voice and learning music in particular. And so a lot of the times, like, a teacher is kind of overwhelmed in a lot of these situations, and they're under pressure to have some sort of project that sounds good to everybody. And a lot of the times the actual learning process gets lost in that. And just because you're struggling with a particular concept doesn't mean that you're a bad singer or that it's impossible. And this is the whole point of this program in a lot of ways, is to kind of show people that you can actually work and develop these things. And singing isn't just for people that it comes naturally to. So a lot of the times, like, we uplift people who are better out of practice, especially, in terms of music at a young age. We say, oh, like, that person's got a natural talent for it, so they should pursue it more. And then we have this kind of other side where we're saying, if you're not good at it, you should pursue it less. And in general, that's a cultural thing that we should reevaluate. It's okay to do things that you're not necessarily good at, especially if it brings you joy. And we're going to talk about what that means, good or bad, because a lot of times it's in this particular context of like trying to get a bunch of young kids to sing in a choir, which is fairly advanced, actually, is getting people to sing together and to read music and to harmonize. These are all really advanced concepts. And so this is the idea here, is we're going to talk about like what sort of holds people back. I get these students who later in life are coming back into it and realize that actually, like, they just were never really taught some basic things or given the time to really explore it. And it's actually, after we go through some of these things and address sort of what's blocked up, all of a sudden you're able to sing much better. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to be, singing professionally to work on the voice. So again, the first kind of, the big kind of things that stick out to other listeners, right, is going to be pitch, which is, are you matching the right note in a song or singing out of tune? And then tone, is it an abrasive tone? So a lot of times, and I had a whole topic on this about matching pitch. A lot of the times, matching pitch has more to do with a physical thing. It's actually our ability to control our breath pressure and our support. And so we have lots of topics of, we have lots of discussion about this and exercises and things. And I think I just want to say that it's actually kind of hard as a coordination and sensation to get at. And for a young or beginning singer, this can be a big source of confusion, especially because there's lots of misinformation out there. And it's just a hard topic to explain. So I'm going to go over this a little bit. When we're working on our exercises to try and gauge support, which is, we often do it from our lower belly and back, right? This feeling of pushing out and creating pressure, and that helps our pitch go up. It's sort of opposite to what you'd think, right? You don't want to reach up, but instead actually push down and out, and this is going to create pressure, allows our voice to go up and down. A lot of times when we do these exercises to get those muscles active, we're doing it in a very large way, just to see if we can move them, because it's very hard to tell someone, now subtly flex your abdominal muscles, your lower abdominal muscles out as you're rising in pitch, and feel it relax as you come back down. So we want to exercise these muscles. And then I think sometimes beginning singers get the wrong idea here, and they're over pushing in certain situations, and they're not stopping to feel what it's like when a particular note is supported appropriately and how to sort of control that toggle. It can be, sometimes what happens is people get this idea that it has to be on all the time while you're singing, that you're always flexing your abdominal muscles out. And then we have trouble actually releasing our support and moving down in pitch. So this is the first thing that a lot of the times, when you're a young kid, we don't really get this type of education. A lot of the times, again, certain music teachers are going to be more accompanists than voice teachers. And in some cases, they're also singers, but they're not necessarily trained in teaching people how to sing. And I do really think that there's a great joy in helping people find their voice. I really get a kick out of it. And it just takes some patience and trying to be really careful about negative words and terms when people are figuring out the right coordination. We all sort of learn these things in our own time. And just because you learn it really quickly doesn't necessarily mean that you're all of a sudden better than everyone else, right? There's sort of a process when we start to kind of figure out how to coordinate the voice. So again, this support feeling can be kind of subtle. And first, what we're doing is we're just trying to get these muscles active, right? There's all these ideas of doing the hissing exercises, right, feeling our belly and our back pop out. I think also a lot of the times we're forced very early on to sing very specific pitches, and jumping into that can be very frustrating. First, we have to figure out how to control the system in a loose way, moving our pitch up and down. So a lot of times I just get people to sort of survey, where is the map, right? How do I control up and down before I get more specific, especially if that's the thing that you're struggling with, which is singing in tune. A lot of us, we hear music all over the place. Sometimes it's about learning the theory and the scales, and we'll get it, we get into that later on. But a lot of times we actually have a fairly intuitive sense of it. It's just that we can't control the muscles to make our voice go up and down. So we get stuck in sort of a singular spot. So what I'll get people doing, right, is first working out those muscles, doing the and then we just practice controlling our pitch just from there, keeping our face fairly relaxed, right? We do a lot of these SOVT exercises to try and feel better coordination down here. So there's all these tricks, right, to try and just get these muscles to activate. We've talked about doing the sort of gentle cough, you can feel your body pop out a little bit. You can blow against your hand. Some people use a singing straw. These are all similar concepts, and it's to help us get that coordination so that we have a button to push. but we still have to apply it to actually singing. And this is always what's really frustrating. It's singing is a juggling act. There's lots of things involved. So we're going to talk about sort of this um, sort of order of operations to try and, address blockages. So I always first kind of start with the breath and the support, aside from stretching and trying to get loose and comfortable. So can we get our pitch to rise as we're doing an SOVT? And I try to really get people to just keep your face very relaxed and use your belly and your back. So we call this like revving up the engine. So it's like maybe a Z is a good one, going like zzz. And again, I'm really trying to do it from down here. I'm like zzz, my belly, my back, controlling that pitch. Can you just get it to go up and down, right? Sometimes you might find that it's not budging. So you have to go back, try to get those muscles activated. So that's why we move them in a big way. And then we just try to see if we can get the right coordination. A lot of the time, we all have plenty of strength to do this. It's just more about that coordination and really trying to map it up with the pitch. If you're not doing it, your head and your neck's going to start to come up and you're going to start to strain. So you can always check here and be like, zzz. And ultimately, the goal is, can we control our pitch with our mouth open? That's harder to do. It's a support system. So when our mouth is open, the air can all rush out. It's much harder to maintain the pitch. But this is really the concept, is eventually we just want to be able to be like, ah, looks like a ventriloquist. I'm not doing much here, controlling it from my belly and my back. That's really how we control pitch. And it's going to be a little hard to control it at first. It's going to be unwieldy and you're not going to always match the pitches. So you're going to try to go for bigger shapes and then refine from there. So that's one of the first things. And I'll use consonants like Z's or M's, right? So we're just trying to feel, when can I push the voice up and how can I get it to relax back down, and feeling that different sensation and being slow about it. And then eventually your body learns how to do that. You can do it more often without thinking about it. So that's one thing, but it gets a little more complicated. This is where tone comes into thank you so much. Yeah. And we'll talk about the Bollywood thing, and I'm also clearing the throat and some of these things. So the next step is what happens up here. So our support system, the main concept here is we're trying to create pressure for our pitch, but if we don't quite have enough for the right pitch, this part of our body tries to compensate. It tries to squeeze the space smaller to make it easier to support that air so that it doesn't all rush out, so that we can make the pitch happen. But this leads to some issues with our tone, right? If our tongue, our jaw, our head and our neck, shoulders get really tight, we start to block the space. And then we can get really stuck in this sort of muscle memory habit. It's always good to point out, like, we are born screaming and we talk, a lot, most of the time, like, people are talking way more than they're singing. And so a lot of our habits and tension comes from just how we talk. And then from there, we actually, we have some stuff that we have to work out, some natural tendencies that come from speech. So it's not because, like, oh, you're a really tight person and loose, relaxed people are better at singing. Yes, there's some truth to that, but also a lot of it is just something we have to actually train physically. And some people just have more of a natural inclination towards it. So the main concept here with tone is you'll get a lot of people who say, oh yeah, people tell me I'm terrible at singing and I don't want to do it because I have a bad tone and it's not something that I can change. It's just how the shape of my head and my body. And a lot of the times that's not the case. In fact, there's a place for every sort of tone quality in the musical vocal world, I think, especially being an artist. It's a matter of pairing up what your voice sounds like with the right instrumentation. But a lot of it is actually how we control our tongue and our jaw and the shape here with our vocal tract and our lips as well. And so actually most of the time, the problem with tone is actually a tension issue, and it stems back to this support thing. So that's why, like, so many singing teachers are really big on, like, trying to get the support activated so that this part of our face can relax and be more flexible, and we can start to get a desired tone. So I'm going to go over just a couple of the things aside from support that we work with here. And so kind of one of the biggest issues that we get is the tongue pulling back, it's blocking the throat. That's sort of the throaty sound. It sounds like an L, or like a backwards L is maybe another way of explaining it. That's this like, oh, oh, it's blocking my ability to work my support appropriately, and it's blocking the resonance. And so that can be a big issue. Um, there's lots of ways to work this, right? So that's why I do a lot of these things where I go like, yeah, 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 yeah. Try to get my tongue, the heel of it, to move up and down and have some mobility. And then the other thing is doing something like A to O, a bright to a dark vowel. I'm trying to keep my tongue still. So I'm just working on my ability. Can I move the part of my tongue that helps me change the timbre of my sound with vowel shapes? And then can I move my lips without my tongue moving? And we're just gaining control over this mechanism. It's not that there's one right or wrong place. This is what we're going to talk about with, especially like Bollywood songs tend to be a little more forward placed and a little more towards this mass kind of nasality place. It's not that that's necessarily bad or good. It's just that you can get stuck in one option and then not be able to do more of a Western tone, which is going to be a little more relaxed with the tongue. So that's sort of the idea, is we just want to be able to control our timbre. And if our tongue is trying to control the support by squeezing and making the space smaller, we get rigid and we're actually not able to control the tone as much. So this is stuff that you can practice. It has nothing to do with just the way your head is shaped, or your inability to sing the right kind of sound just because of your genetics, right? It's actually has a little more to do with the tension and this concept of working our support. So I talked a little bit about this nasality thing. This came up in our last week. There's a difference between going like yeah, 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 and then actually pushing the tongue more forward into a nasal tone. And typically, when people go way too far in this direction, good, good. I'm glad. I'm glad that you feel that. Um, this a lot of the times, this direction, if you go too far, you're gonna block the space and it's gonna get too tight, and you get a little more of a piercing kind of nasal sound, and that can be bothersome to some people. Again, it depends on the culturally what you're used to, but it's also just like there's a limit to how far you can push your tongue forward, and that's twang. So it's different from yeah, 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 yeah. That's going more like and it's going to make more of a nasal tone, because I'm collapsing the space by pushing it forward that way. A great way to check this, and some other singing teachers have talked about this, is actually just plugging your nose. When you take away this option, you can tell if your tongue is really tight, moving forward in particular, because your nose is going to buzz. And I'll demonstrate this. Versus if your tongue is not doing a nasal thing and it's moving just more up and down with the heel, then it won't make a big difference if you plug your nose or not. So I'll show you what I mean. If I'm going like, say I'm here, yeah, 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 yeah. It's less nasal. Now if I go, you'll hear it immediately and you'll feel it buzz in there. That's actually, it's kind of a subtle change in the tongue, but it makes a big difference as to where you feel that resonance, where it's coming from. So in that case, I'm doing this yaw thing to calibrate, to make sure that I can move my tongue both up and down and it doesn't get stuck in one position. You can also feel under here, under your chin, if this is starting to lock, that's telling you that you might be trying to lock in one position or the other. Again, you can kind of lock in any position, and we just want flexibility and mobility. And that's where the support comes into play. It usually is a sign that you're not doing enough in your belly and your back. So it becomes this juggling act. And that can be really, really frustrating, again, for a singer who's starting out, to try and find your voice. So I always say be patient. It takes some sort of discovery time to sort of find the coordination. And then your voice really will open from there and you can actually condition it appropriately. Otherwise, you're just reinforcing bad habits and it becomes this vicious cycle. So the other concept, right, is the tongue can fall back, right? And that can be this tension that you'll especially feel here. It'll kind of get hard. And that's that, oh, sometimes happens when people are trying to sing more classical music. they're trying to make a dark sound artificially, and really the sound just comes from release and relaxation of the vocal tract. But it's sort of this fake opera sound that I'll talk about. It's kind of like going, oh, oh, and you can hear it's more of a throaty kind of sound. It's sort of blocking the overtones down versus kind of amping them up on the higher end. And that's going to cause a lot of tension, sort of a raspiness in the voice. And also for a lot of people, that sort of unclear kind of throat sound, it's going to be less resonant. So I always say the tongue is the gatekeeper to our resonance. It helps us sort of change and modify our tone. And so being a really masterful singer sometimes is your ability to change the instrument to fit whatever you're doing. And that comes from actually, it's less about doing endless exercises and more about being very present about the tension and making sure that you can keep your tongue flexible, figuring out what habit you might be having. So that sometimes blocks people from their ability to use their support appropriately. And this is where it becomes, again, this game. It's hard to control pitch if it's happening from up here. You're not always gonna make it to the right pitch. It's not gonna have the right ring to it. And then people are gonna tell you, oh, well, you shouldn't sing and you're not a singer. And that's 100% not true. It's actually something that's very, very trainable. And it's just finding the right tricks that help you find that balance in your voice. Another typical one that happens for people is when they're thinking about support, they're trying to flex from here and they're actually squeezing in a lot of the time. This is why sort of posture is an important thing. But it comes from this myth about like, oh, I'm supposed to sing with my diaphragm or something active with this area. This area we don't really consciously control as much. And so that actually kind of sets people into a lot of confusion. And if you squeeze your upper abs, you're pushing your air out. So you're going to start running out of breath. And it makes this very strained sound. So it's actually controlling it from our lower abdominal muscles. And so you can put your hand here and you can put your hand at your belly. Try to see, can I flex just my lower abdominal muscles and keep my upper abdominal muscles more relaxed? Sometimes they flex out, but you'll notice a lot of singing teachers do this kind of thing. A lot of professional singers do this, right? And it's actually helping your coordination move in the right direction so that you're not squeezing in, kind of caving in this way. That it really messes with our breath pressure system, and you're not allowing the diaphragm to just sort of kind of float on its own a little more. So that also can be an issue that people come across. And anytime you're doing something wrong with your support, it just causes a backup where all the other things start to get really tight. It's like thinking like a car engine when it's not running appropriately. It's going to start to overheat, and you're going to have a backup maybe in your tongue or your jaw, and it's going to change the tone. So I'm always like, be patient, relax, try to find the bottom of your voice where it's comfortable and see if you can work through some of these coordination habits. And then all of a sudden, you're all, in like a few minutes, you're able to sing up through your range, and everyone has access to their range. If you can talk, you can sing, and you can learn to adjust the timbre of your voice to match things. It just takes a little bit of practice, really. And again, a lot of times we don't have that opportunity in school or in classes. And so we get labeled as a good singer or a bad singer based on how quickly you pick it up, really. And so I find that problematic, actually. And I think that that's, something that we can change about the way we think about singing, right? It's like, oh, if you're not good at soccer, you shouldn't play soccer. That seems to be a sad thing to say, especially if you enjoy soccer. You could still play it. And in fact, you'll get better as you do it more and more. What it does is it discourages people from approaching singing because we sort of equate a lot of shame in it rather than seeing it as more of actually like a physical process, an art form that is like a sport that we can train and condition our voice to find more freedom. So I always say technique is a freeing thing. It allows you to make more choices, change the timbre to something that's desirable to you as well as to other people, but mainly to you, right? And a lot of it has to do with the comfort of it, right? If you've got a lot of tension here, it's going to feel less comfortable and you're going to be discouraged from singing. So that's sort of the main concept here again. The other thing that's kind of hard, right, is like It's just it's a hard thing to practice without having outside feedback because it's such an awareness game. It's so helpful when you can have someone who's an expert help you discover where those blockages are, where sort of the mechanism is getting a little stuck, and so that you can focus on that in particular. So a lot of the times, what's confusing when people are learning the vocal practice is they get this overwhelm of information, right? It's like too many options, and it's understandable, especially from my perspective as a teacher, trying to give you a tool belt of different things to try out, but it doesn't mean that all of them are going to be helpful for you. In fact, some of them might reinforce some of the things that you shouldn't be doing or that are causing you more tension and less ease in your voice. So lots of work on belting is going to give you more tongue tension a lot of the time. So you want to be careful to kind of balance that out a little bit. I think that's sort of part of this is how do we break it down into pieces that you can accomplish one bit at a time, and where do you get your feedback from? So teachers, obviously, there's a couple other resources. I mentioned this in some of the other classes. Singingcarrots.com is if you're trying to match pitch. This is sort of a visual cue so you can see where your voice is going. And I encourage people to just play around with it first, like as a sliding scale. Our voice is really more of a sliding scale, right? We go like, oh. So when we start to focus on specific points, we tend to get really tight or it just gets discouraging. So I'm like, watch it go up and down. And then we talk about specific spots in songs where, your voice needs to be right around this spot or right at this spot. That can be really helpful. There's also another one for iPhones called Ella, and it's on sheet music, and it shows you where the notes are, and your voice comes in this way, and it shows you if it's going up and down so that you can get that appropriate feedback. So it's really hard to practice, right? If you don't have a teacher, and sometimes we only get, you're doing it once every few weeks or so, or in a class where you're not getting very much attention because there's lots of students involved. So that's something that actually with just a little bit of consistent practice, you're going to start to learn how to match pitch much better. And then we can get more specific with the details. But you can't just try to be like, okay, try to hit this pitch and then be like, oh, no, you're not singing it right. Try to hit it again. You have to do this workaround. You have to help the person develop the map before you do the specific roads. Like, where are the edges? How do I even create any of that? So that's a lot of the frustration is pretty much right there, actually. Yeah, a lot of this stuff we're putting into the course. I haven't written a book yet, but hopefully I can consolidate all of this. There's a great resource, voicescienceworks.org, and you'll notice actually a lot of the famous singing teachers and books all quote that in the back, saying that that's where they get a lot of their technical kind of scientific research. It's just I know the guy and his wife, and they're just really good at consolidating this complicated information into something that is correct where we are with our science, but also isn't like a ton of words. Sometimes you look up how to sing and you get these like really, really lengthy things about music history, and you're just reading and reading, and you're like, what are some actual physical things that I can do to start to actually control and feel these things in my body, right? And so that one's more concise, but it's also still very technical in that sense. But yeah, I recommend, check out these courses here. A lot of the things that I'm covering today are little bits of things that I covered in How to Strengthen Your Voice is about support, pitch matching and why it's hard. It's about our hearing and our perception, as well as this sort of physical thing that we're talking about with our ability to control the pressure and actually move our voice up and down. So there's that. And then smooth tone, we're talking about resonance, which is another thing that can be frustrating for beginning singers. This has a little bit to do with that timbre concept that I'm talking about, how we adjust our timbre as our tongue and the shape of the vocal tract is changing to bring out different overtones. And it changes the way that it sounds to other people. It sounds more brassy and bright or a little more hollow and open. And you do the wrong kind of timbre in a certain song, it's going to sound bad. But again, it doesn't mean that like one is right or wrong. It's just there's two extremes in the mechanism, going really, really bright into nasality when the tongue is pushing forward, I'm going too dark into this sort of throaty sound as it's pushing back. That's generally what people think is kind of ugly. I think a lot of the time is just when it gets locked one way or the other, because it's generally less comfortable too, right? And we're perceiving that it's uncomfortable. So we're just trying to find that sort of place in the middle. Um, yeah, but again, it can be really complicated because sometimes it has to do with not enough activity happening down here. And then you're trying to focus on this, and then all of a sudden these muscles start kind of locking into place. So in a lot of our practices, we're trying to do exercises in sort of a routine, kind of repetitive, slightly hypnotic way so as to coax ourselves into this appropriate balance. And again, what's frustrating is it's like a juggling act, is like the second you start singing, all these things are happening at once, and it's really hard to parcel out what's causing it, right? Like what's the main epicenter, and then from there, once we figure that out with a student, especially a beginning student, they're good. Like they're starting to like actually do the practice, and they're strengthening their voice, and it's like it's go time. It's just that was their main barrier. And again, a lot of the times, if that's not addressed, you're doing all these exercises and you're trying all these things, and you still feel kind of stuck, and you're probably just reinforcing that same habit. So what's frustrating is you have to stop, slow down, check in with the habits every time. Fundamentals and singing are essential. We're always checking our support, checking the mobility in our tongue, making sure our jaw is relaxing. It's like regular maintenance, for your car, or for your health, right? You need to check in every day and get a sensation of all of these things working correctly. That's really like what a warm up is for me a lot of the time too. It's more about like, are all these different components coordinated, or is my breath really shallow today for some reason? Then I need to do more breathing exercises, and then everything else is going to start to open up. But if I just jump over that and try to go to the next thing, I'm going to have tension. It's going to start to accumulate here, and I'm going to hit a bunch of roadblocks. So I try to do it in a little more of a stepwise way so that I can actually adequately check in with each part of my voice. And then you can do drills, and then you can start conditioning your voice. But if you just jump into conditioning your voice, you're often teaching yourself habits and tension, and you're going to run into vocal damage issues, right? That was one of the other topics we talked about, which is when you aren't singing correctly and you're causing a lot of strain and squeezing here, it can potentially damage or bruise your vocal folds. And that's where a lot of the vocal pain and strain happens, is the damage here. And so again, we run into this dilemma. And this is also probably another thing that's difficult for beginning singers, is it's kind of a perishable instrument. Like I talked about in the other class, like misuse, overuse, and abuse is this triangle of vocal fatigue. And when you're learning your voice, you're way more likely to not use it efficiently. So you're not going to have as much time singing on your voice before it starts to feel tired. And that's frustrating. But think of it like any other sport, being an athlete. I like to do climbing. If I haven't been climbing in a while, or if it's seeing people climb for the first time, you're using your arms the entire time, right? And you get tired so quickly. Meanwhile, someone who's a seasoned vet is using their legs, they're using their core, and they're able to climb for longer. They've also been conditioning their voice, so their body is adapting to this. And there's all sorts of cool studies about how our voice and the mechanism and muscles are adapting as we learn to sing. So we are conditioning our voice slowly over time, become more elastic, and all of these kinds of things. It just takes time. Like again, it's a matter of like training the right amount and paying attention to when you're fatigued and when you're pushing past that point. That's going to set you back as well. You can get really frustrated because you're going to have to stop singing, try to come back to it. You have all this muscle memory of the tension. So history has shown that a lot of great vocalists, not everyone, but there's some really great examples of singers who just start in this more careful way, and train that right kind of appropriate habit, and it sets in, right? It becomes your technique, more permanently. That's really the goal, is to try to make this more muscle memory so you can sing for longer. You don't feel that kind of strain, but it takes time, right? If you push anyone in any sort of sports world, eventually they're going to hurt themselves. And this happens even with really good professional singers, really good professional athletes, right? They're pushing themselves too much, and then it completely sets you back. And so again, that can be a really big frustration. Um, also just to respond to Subroto Ray, the unclear throat thing. So we talked a little bit about the tongue. Some of it is also just allergies, acid reflux. We have mucus in general in our vocal folds, and we just want to be we want to make sure that we actually do something to address that before we start singing, because it can become a vicious cycle uh, if you have some sort of grit there. We tend to kind of flinch and squeeze around it as well. So in some of the other classes, I talk about doing humming exercises or using vibration to try and clear that off of our vocal folds, not trying to hack or squeeze at it, because if you do lots of coughing and your vocal folds are slapping together, it's causing irritation. And then your body actually creates more mucus to try and protect that area. And so it becomes this really vicious cycle. So the best thing to do is just somewhere kind of in your low middle range is do this kind of thing where we're like, I'm moving through my vowel shapes. I'm going like, yo, yo, yo. You might start to hear some crackles and pops and little things as the mucus is flicking off. Again, don't do this super high, but in your low register, you kind of can shake that stuff off and then clear it. Try again. And I'm going to start to get more and more of that kind of refined resonant sound. Some of it also is because I'm working on that tongue mobility. I'm moving my tongue up and down, working a little bit of this area with my lips. And that's actually helping me find the resonance. I call it calibrating. As we go through all the vowel shapes, we can find these sweet spots where it rings more. That's really a lot of singing, is finding these spots where we get lots of resonance. And then just making sure that we keep our support active so that we can stay in that place without it kind of locking. So there's a lot to think about with singing, and sometimes it looks so effortless, right? With professionals, that's the art form, is to make it look and to feel effortless, because we're athletes and we're trying to find endurance, so we can keep singing and we can have all of that mobility. But it makes everyone feel like it's something you're just born with. So all of a sudden, people again have this thought that occurs, and they're like, oh, it must just be because of that person's genetic and they're a musical family and that's a singer. And I don't have that because I started out with some of this tension, for all sorts of reasons why we can have that particular tension in our tongue, or our inability to breathe into our belly and our back, that diaphragmatic breathing, that ability to drop the belly. That can be really hard for a lot of people. And especially I'm teaching on camera like this. And, I have to ask, like, well, do you feel it down there? Like, as your belly expanding? And if you're an athlete or someone who does a lot of core work, a lot of times we're taught to squeeze up and in. So it's like the complete opposite feeling. And it can be a little nerve wracking to let your belly go too. But that's actually how we have to sing, is we have to let our abdominal muscles go in the top, let our belly drop. And again, so there's some nerves that are kind of associated with that. Yeah. Now I would say, like, the other barrier, and this is for even professional singers, but definitely for beginners, is the nerve aspect of it. Performing, making weird sounds. Our voice is so connected to our sense of self and personality. And so it can feel very vulnerable. And so I always encourage people early on, see it as discovery and play. Be more okay with making sound shapes and sound stretches rather than a particular, like, beautiful sound, right? If you're focused on, like, I need to make this perfect sound that my singing teacher is doing and imitate it, you're kind of missing the point. It's more about feeling the connection with the mechanism, feeling these right sort of moments, paying attention, having awareness as to what's happening with your body, really slowing down. That's going to be a much better way. Yeah. Hey, Gary, nice to see you. Absolutely. So Yeah, the nerves thing can be tricky, right? And that was we had a whole thing on that, as well with performance anxiety and how to help a nervous, shaky voice. When we're nervous, it's really hard to control our coordination, and so there's a whole process with that too. Is how do you get comfortable singing in front of people? It's a muscle just like anything else, and I would say that it's really helpful because we doesn't matter who you are, there's often some sort of public speaking involved in your life, especially in school. We have to do stuff where we present in front of people, and it's all performance skills, and it transfers. So being comfortable singing in front of people can help you have confidence in other ways. I get it. It's kind of a weird experience to sing in front of people, but that can also hold people back, right? Is this fear of judgment. And again, it kind of stems from this typical story that I talk about, which is somewhere at some point, a lot of people get shamed for their voice, and you're expected to like have a good voice from the very get go. That creates a lot of tension, and it creates a lot of tension for people who we even address as being talented or good at this, because then we hold them to a certain standard. And I really think technique is freeing. Again, I'll say it a million times. Singing is about finding freedom and release and being present with your body. And so technique should always be freeing. Of course, we get further down the line and we're trying very particular things, and it can get get showy and becomes about entertainment. But a lot of times I just try to ask people like, well, why are you singing? What's the point? Is it something you enjoy? Is it because you want to impress people? And getting to the heart of that can help you start to become more comfortable with singing and singing for yourself more. This is something I also talked about in the other class about performance anxiety and such. Is sing for yourself. Singing is a wellness activity, and you can do it to relax yourself and to get comfortable. And then from there, that can turn into something that's really beautiful. You can start to express yourself with it. It's a medium for that. But sometimes we get lost in sort of the pursuit of trying to improve our voice, and we miss the point of it. And that can actually become very, very stressful again. So I can't tell you how heartwarming it is to hear a young singer, especially a very, very young kid, singing and not doing it technically perfectly, but just singing from their heart. And it'll melt you. It's just so, so cute and amazing. But you could do the same thing and have a kid who's like very rigid and singing perfectly, but it makes us maybe a little uncomfortable in some ways. Is it really about the quality of that sound, or is it about the experience of sort of what that provides us and that person relaxing and enjoying music in some way, right? And of course, yes, we can get better at things and we can learn to refine that, but as a beginning singer, that's not what you should be focusing on. Otherwise, you're gonna quit. You're just not gonna. It's not gonna be fun anymore. Um, I think just as a shout out to teachers in sort of the classical realm, I think it can be tricky when we teach only one style of technique, especially something that works well for you and is something that's more refined. Like classical music is kind of the Olympics of singing in a lot of ways. And so I'm always trying to not just teach sort of what I learned in my technique, but try to get a larger sense of the different kinds of tensions that can happen with different voice types, what it sounds like, how to sort of create that myself, even just to sort of know what that feels like a little bit, to try and create exercises that help guide us to a place that's more comfortable. Um, so yeah, that's sort of the trick sometimes is, you'll get a teacher who's saying, "Oh, your tone isn't correct and you need to do this and the tone isn't correct." Get really discouraged that way rather than just talking about let's find mobility and release with our tongue so that we can find the right timbre. And like ultimately it's your decision what is the right timbre, and maybe you just haven't found the right kind of music that fits for that. And this is the next concept, which is it can be really hard to find music to start out with as a beginning singer, because a lot of songs are advanced, right? They're things that we like listening to, and there's a lot going on in them. And uh, oftentimes pop music in particular kind of favors tenors and altos, or a particular kind of range where it's big and brassy. I mean, that's not always the case. Now we're kind of moving towards that light sort of soprano-y kind of sound. Uh, But ultimately, that can make it really hard if you're a different kind of voice type, or and you're just beginning, and you're not at that level of strength. So it's like, well, what do I practice? I don't want to practice like really weird old songs. I love classical music, by the way, but ultimately that can be not as accessible to people and not where their expression and their passion for music is yet. Sometimes get to that later, right? We sing through a bunch of pop songs, then all of a sudden it's like, what else is out there? Let's try some classical stuff and see what that's like. But again, it can be hard to find the right kind of song. You want to focus on something that is generally in a smaller range that has more of like a single note or two notes per word kind of a thing. Um, oftentimes I'm helping students find these kinds of things, but you can also take a song and you can weight train it. So this is a concept I bring up a lot, which is you can actually find the lower key and sing it in that key. You'll often need a teacher to help you figure out how to do this. Sometimes you can look up lower version karaoke track or lower version cover or higher version, depends. So I have plenty of soprano students who are frustrated with trying to sing in chest voice all the time and finding music that fits their style as well. So this is the point. If it's too low for you, you're going to be pressing and you're going to create tension habits. If it's too high, it's the same thing. And then you're going to be like, well, I just can't sing. But you're just putting on the 100-pound weights before you've gotten to that level. So again, we weight train it. We find a lower key, we sing it there, we see what that feels like in our voice, and in a way where we can actually maintain a more open, relaxed mechanism. We're in control of it versus desperation, right? If you're trying to hit these high notes, like you're jumping from ledge to ledge and you're just barely making it, you're pulling yourself up, you're going to hurt yourself. It's going to be way, way more fatiguing and you're going to be teaching yourself bad habits. So it becomes this vicious cycle, right? And again, people are like, I've just been trying this for a while now. And every time I try to sing this song, it sets me back. You're going to way too advanced of a level too early, or it's just too high. It's not for your range. So you find a lower place, and then you half step by half step, incrementally, we train it higher and higher until your voice is able to maintain a target range. And you might find actually that where it sits originally isn't the right feeling for you. It's not as comfortable. And that's totally fine. There's plenty of professional singers who cover other singers and they find a key that's more comfortable for them. With a caveat, too low or too high energetically for a song, it can start to sound off from the meaning. So there's a little bit of a limited range. And if the song is a really wide range, there's less options about where you can move it because it's just a wider range. So that makes it more challenging and more of an advanced thing to work on. So again, what's hard about this and frustrating is sometimes as a beginning singer, we don't know what's hard and what isn't. And you're going to need some guidance on that a lot of the time, especially if you're experiencing a lot of tension. And then once you can kind of find the right track, the keys that tend to be more comfortable for you, you can start to grow your voice from there. So that's really the big concept there. I'm often doing a lot of work, just trying to get people to keep a little bit of focus throughout their days on, oh, I really like that song, I'm going to write it down, or that one sounds like something that could be singable, or I had an emotional connection to that music. And I'm like, just write it down. Don't tell me, don't be like, oh, I can't do that. Just let me know. And then we'll figure out if we can rework it in a way where you can do it in your own voice. So once you have some more and more of these songs that you can work with, it starts to get way more fun. But again, the common frustration is there's sort of some basic things that we have to figure out with our voice sometimes in order to start singing songs. It's not true for everybody. Sometimes people are already jumping in and they're able to do that. That, again, doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. There's a lot of times where people are singing pretty well, but they're using sort of some artificial habits to kind of fake some of these things. And then at a certain point in your career or such, you're going to hit a wall and it's going to be hard with efficiency. Of course, there's a limit to everybody and we have to take care of ourselves. So, this overuse is a thing. Like, doesn't matter how good your technique is, eventually you're going to get fatigued and then you're going to start to potentially hurt yourself. So it's a challenge, right? And that can be definitely very, very frustrating for people when they watch some singers already singing lots of songs and they're still focusing on certain technique things, there's always a song that you can find to sing a basic melody, a folk tune, and even just little snippets of it, right? So sometimes like a pop song is very gentle in its verse, and then all of a sudden in the chorus it goes up the octave and gets kind of crazy. You don't have to learn the entire song. You can just learn pieces of things, workshop it, try the chorus down some keys, and then eventually you can kind of piece this together. Or even that may not be a song that you actually perform. It's just for workshopping. It's for getting comfortable, trying things out, and then eventually you're going to be more capable of singing the kinds of music that you want. But it takes some time and some practice. So yeah, I don't know. We're getting close to the end here. Um, do any of you have any questions or anything that you've noticed that has been difficult or frustrating? And it's really, really important, especially as teachers, to kind of get a better sense of this, definitely, because it can just help me figure out a better practice to sort of guide people to finding their voice. That's sort of the whole point of doing the practice kind of the way that I do, is I try to think about what are the common tendencies that we have and how do I start to address those early on so that it's not like, years in, you're like, oh, by the way, you're singing with all this tension here and that could change. It's like that. That's going to take us some time. You want to start with a good solid foundation of these things. Again, sometimes I get students who have already trained for a while, and some of these things are new concepts. It's definitely something you can still work through. It just becomes more and more challenging if if it's something that is a really, really instilled habit. So technique should be freeing. It should feel good. Like singing can feel really good first and foremost, and you can kind of grow it from there. It's just about being patient and not trying to sing things that are way too challenging. Finding sort of your ticket in. What kind of style do you like? What gets you inspired? And so, I don't know, there's a lot of questions about how do we teach this in school for kids? How do we make it more about exploring and less about like quality and evaluation? I think it's kind of silly to think about trying to make uh, kids do that at that sort of age, because it can be kind of traumatic. And I think that it leads again to a lot of people thinking that singing is just for a select few and that you shouldn't even try if you have maybe what's considered like an unpleasant voice to other people. Again, too, like there's so many artists where like they're not singing necessarily with perfect technique, but they're doing something expressive with their voice and with their music, and it fits well. So again, like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What's the point of vocal technique? It's to find ease so that you can do whatever you want to do. And there's something to be said about grit singing can sound just beautiful in the right way. But it doesn't, technically on the classical side, it's like the thing to avoid. So it depends on sort of what you're going for and what your project is. And so again, treating being a singer like an athlete, but also as an artist, right? You can spend so much time trying to make a perfect landscape, but it might not be what works for you. And there's plenty of people who've made great careers doing abstract expressionism and art where they're flinging things around and feeling the energy of that. Are we to say one is better than the other? They have sort of there's a different place for each of them in a different context and a different technique that's required. So again, I encourage you to figure out what is it that interests you? What kinds of barriers do I have? Does my head and my neck come up when I'm trying to sing and I feel a lot of strain? You want to work with your support, right? Do I have that throaty or nasal sound? You're going to work with tongue mobility and resonance work. Yeah, yes, Teddy. Our pressure system here is related to, yes, it sort of goes in both directions, but it's not entirely that. I would say that comes from too much of a release or maybe too much water. But yeah, there's certainly there's some sort of connection to that. I'm not 100% uh, on the subtleties of it, but yeah, there's people have talked about that. Sort of going to the bathroom is a pressure system, and it's the same mechanism down here, but obviously a switch. um, so it is different too, but that sometimes people can get confused because it's sort of very close, that sensation sometimes of strain and kind of building up pressure, but we're creating pressure for for our voice and not for that. So that's really funny. I have to do a little more research into that. There's some anecdotal things about some opera singers as well, especially super low singers, I guess is what I would say actually, because that has a little more to do with kind of like release, I think, and a relaxation of the support. When you're singing really low, we're trying to get this very gentle support. So a lot of air is rushing out. And so if you're like flexing a lot and then all of a sudden you completely let go, maybe maybe that's sort of part of it. But again, uh, I don't know, not entirely sure. Hasn't happened to me. So my one thing is you don't have to chug a lot of water before you sing. It's kind of takes longer for your vocal folds to get hydrated. So drink water well in advance so that you don't have a full bladder and run into that issue. Um, yeah. Any other questions? Part of this is consistency too, right? Is just taking time to do this a little bit every day. So it's a muscle memory thing. Maybe that's a great thing to add here is like if you're doing this kind of few and far between infrequently, you're gonna get a feeling and then your life goes on and then you come back to singing and you've lost that sensation and that feeling. So that can be also a very frustrating thing. So I would say give yourself some consistency. Try to touch in with the feeling every day a little bit. You don't have to practice for an extensive amount of time. In fact, just like what I talked about with fatigue, it's much better as a beginning singer to do short bursts and then quality practice with a teacher or somebody who can kind of really help you get some momentum and address certain kinds of things that you need to be more aware of in terms of the tension and the mechanism being in or out of balance in a particular way. So yeah, that's what I would say is just like touch base with it, every day a little bit. Sing in the shower if you find like a nice echoey hallway or something like that where you're getting lots of feedback. Try to start to become present with your singing and your body. I'd say singing in the car is kind of, I know a lot of people do it. It's fine, but you're kind of stuck in a certain position and you're focused very externally. So it may not be as helpful as people think because I think you really need to spend some time being very aware of the sensations. And so, it may not be the safest thing to do. I certainly do sing in the car sometimes, but I usually find actually I'll tend to kind of have worse habits sometimes as I do that. I'll do gentle humming and sort of that kind of more relaxing kind of singing in the car or singing along to the radio, but like I don't try to like practice so much like that. Special trick to singing with vowels. You're very welcome. Yeah, so this is all about that tongue stuff, right? So A is in the middle, and you can start to kind of modify that vowel. And, so an A can get very bright and have twang, kind of like E, and kind of go that way, or it can be like eh, eh, and have a little more of this sort of wide like shape. So I'll do things where I go like we, and I'll try to do like an ah vowel first, and then get the a to fit in a similar place. So this is actually this is a great point. So when we talk, and it depends on your dialect too, and particular languages have some more certain kinds of tensions compared to others. But when we talk, it's more visual, and so we tend to use more of our lips and our jaw. And when we sing, we want more of just that tongue motion, and so that can actually be an issue. So people are going a, and it's contracting the back of their vocal tract instead of a. So I'll do this exercise where I go like wa we. And I'm trying to keep this part the same. Ya ya ya. It's the reverse of ya. yeah, yeah, wa, we, we. The tongue is sort of going here, up higher and up higher. Just trying to get better control over that. So I would watch for spreading, in particular, Maria. But sometimes I really have to like see it visually. Similar thing, if like for Eastern European singers, the tongue tends to sit a little further back by nature of the language and the dialect. So you might have more issues with that kind of tongue tension. Whereas um, Spanish might have a little more of that brightness in it. Again, it just depends on dialects and things, and there's all sorts of other things involved. But for example, English, we tend to not use our lips as much, and so a stiff upper lip, you can start to sound more and more kind of like country western. And so I try to get people to use this more. And so if you have more of that accent, you're gonna try to do oohs and ohs with your jaw and go like ooh, instead of wah, 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 and be able to just control your lips. Whereas perhaps if you're a French speaker or someone who uses more lip action, that's going to be more comfortable and natural for you. So again, it really just depends on like your speech habits. And I just see it as like singing in different languages is like a different color palette to work with. And so I actually get a kick out of that. I love, especially in the classical realm, finding sort of these different colors that come from certain languages and the way the dialect works mechanically. And then there's this thing called IPA. So that's the International Phonetic Alphabet. And that can be a great way to sort of find crossover with mechanistic shapes and particular languages and how to get that kind of sound. So a lot of classical music is actually about this, is finding the appropriate kind of shape for the dialect. Getting comfortable singing in French and German and Spanish, and the list goes on and on. Uh, and Yeah, that's sort of the idea. Like yeah, the Bollywood singing tends to be a little more forward mask, and there's use of nasality, and you get to a much kind of higher tier of resonance a lot of the time. So that's something you can kind of listen to, is that difference between a more kind of backplay sound and a much more forward resonance. And so yeah, if you're a Bollywood singer, it actually might be kind of nice to explore a more relaxed back tongue just to feel that contrast so that you can kind of come in and out of that. I remember in college, there was a singer who was learning Western classical in my voice studio who was had that background, and that tended to be what was hard. Actually, was just being very comfortable with a particular kind of technique, and then trying to switch to the other style. You kind of sometimes you'll go back to what you're used to, and so especially if you're not super hyper aware of it and making those specific choices. Anyways, that's sort of I kind of went a little off on a tangent there, but again, everybody has a slightly different background, and so what you need to bring your voice into balance is going to be a little different. The common issues are pitch problems and tone issues, and those are all things that you certainly can work on, practice, and improve. So that's my main message to everybody. Yeah, very, very good. All right. Well, I will catch everyone next time for our next topic. Thanks for listening, and good luck with your singing journey. And if you're a beginner, stick with it, be patient, slow down, and you'll find your way out of these particular barriers that you might be facing. All right. I will catch everyone next time. Take care.